The voice of sharing. Durian ASEAN.
Hello, welcome back to ASEAN Breakfast Call, the dialogue session. And today, we're privileged to have Miss Firdaus Husni, who is the chair of the Constitutional Law Committee of Bar Council, and she's also one of the key movers behind the MyConsti campaign. So, I believe we had a little intro about what MyConsti is last week, I believe. So, but for the privilege of the listeners who doesn't know yet, let's start with that. What is MyConsti?
All right, okay. My Constitution is a campaign which is run by the Bar Council Constitutional Law Committee.
And let's start with what MyConsti is.
All right, My Constitution is a campaign which is run by the Bar Council Constitutional Law Committee. This campaign was first launched in 2009. So now we are in our fifth year. Yeah, with of course with a slightly different focus from what we did during the first year of the campaign. So the purpose of this campaign is to actually bring the Federal Constitution into the hearts and minds of the right. Yeah, meaning to say, we simplify the contents of the Federal Constitution to be able to tell the people what is in the Federal Constitution and what is the significance of understanding the Federal Constitution. Yes.
Right. But you're talking about Constitution many times. But what really is the Constitution?
All right. Okay. Now that's one important question. I gave a talk. Yes, I mean it's on that point. I gave a talk last week about the Constitution. They wanted me to speak specifically on race-based policies. But anyway, in the midst of my talk, and suddenly one of the participants interrupted me and said that, well, I've got this act. He's a representative from the Orang Asal, the Orang Asli, and says I've got this act, concerning the Orang Asli, and now you're telling me about the Federal Constitution. So, which one actually should I follow? Which one is more powerful, I guess, to put it bluntly, than the other? So I say, okay, let's just backtrack a bit. The Federal Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and this is actually set out in the Federal Constitution itself, which says that, the Federal Constitution is the supreme law of the Federation. Now, the effect of this is that all other laws are secondary to it, and all other laws in its contents and spirit must embrace the Federal Constitution, meaning to say it cannot go beyond the Federal Constitution. It cannot trespass, the limit that has already been prescribed under the Federal Constitution. For example, say a provision concerning freedom of expression, freedom of expression, freedom of speech and expression, which says basically that every citizen has the right to freedom of speech and expression. So that is basically the spirit of the Federal Constitution. It gives people the right to free speech. So therefore, all these other laws concerning your rights to freedom of speech and expression, for example, the printing presses, Sedition Act, of course, and then you have the Official Secrets Act. All these, if you look at it, are laws limiting your freedom of speech. But if you look back in Federal Constitution, yes, Federal Constitution allows restrictions on freedom of speech, but it has to be within the limited restrictions. For example, I gave, if it's for the purpose of public interest of the Federation, or, morality, or preservation of order, it has to fall under the restrictions. So all these other laws seeking to limit one's freedom of speech and expression, it has to be within the boundary of the Federal Constitution, of the restrictions that was set out in the Federal Constitution itself. It cannot be so wide as to cover everything. So, which is why some people argue, for example, the Peaceful Assembly Act, like, for example, people are saying, okay, that's, some argue that it's in violation of one's freedom of assembly. And then one say, look, when you allow all these protest, right, be it peaceful or not, it will provide traffic jam, for example. People say traffic jam cannot be a disruption to public order, because if that's the argument, then that the word public order in federal constitution could mean anything, which is not permissible if you look at case laws. Because case law says restrictions in the federal constitution cannot be construed so broadly as to cover everything, because it will open up to possibilities of abuses by those in authority.
And maybe just to plug another example
Yes.
of, let's say there's a conflict of law between the federal constitution and a law. Like the law actually limits more than the constitution. Like maybe in the case of the UKM4, what actually happened there?
Okay. Now in the case of UKM4, the law that was challenged, now this actually relates back to, exactly what I said earlier. The law that was actually challenged is a certain provision in the University and Colleges Act, AUKU, right? Which limits the which limits the participation of students in political activities. Yeah. So when it was brought to court, the court actually says that provisions actually violates the students' constitutional rights. The students' constitutional rights, and therefore the court rules that that particular provision is unconstitutional. So that's a perfect example of where a law or even a decision made by the government, where a law or decision made by the government is being taken in contravention of the federal constitution, you can actually take up the cases in court, and the court will then give its interpretation and declare that particular act or decision as invalid. Yes.
So the laws that are made by the parliament is not absolute, and it's only like secondary to the constitution.
Yes.
And so, but for the benefit of our listeners who doesn't know the UKM4 case, maybe you can provide some background on.
Okay, let me just give a little of background. Basically, in the UKM 4 cases, 4 UKM students were arrested and was charged under Section 15(5)(a) of the University and University Colleges Act for their alleged participation in a political campaign. So the case was brought under. The case was brought up, and it went all the way up until. It went all the way up until the
Federal
Court of Appeal or Federal Court.
Appeal.
Let me just double check. Until the Court of Appeal. It went all the way until the Court of Appeal, and then where the constitutionality of that particular section was being discussed and decided. So, okay, all right. So in this case, the lawyers for the students had argued under Article 10(1)(a) that the students, as I've said earlier, that under Article 10(1)(a), citizens has the right to freedom of speech and expression. So, I'm just giving a simple argument. So, by virtue of that, Section 15(5)(a) of the University and University Colleges Act is unconstitutional. So they won at the High Court, and then and then it was brought up to the Court of Appeal, and then at the Court of Appeal, at the Court of Appeal, the two judges at the Court of Appeal held that Malaysian universities, the students in Malaysian universities could participate in politics, and that the law I said earlier, Section 15(5)(a), prohibiting them from doing so was unconstitutional. So in short, that's basically what the court says on a majority. So you can say one of the Court of Appeal judges, in its view of what Section 15.5a says that what better illustration can there be of the utter absurdity of Section 15.5a than the facts of this case, where students of universities and university colleges face the disciplinary proceedings with the grim prospect of expulsion simply because of their presence at a parliamentary by-election. Yeah. So basically, this particular judge, Justice Linton Albert, is saying that this particular Section 15.5a is ridiculous. It's absurd in its implementation. So much so, just because they were there during a parliamentary by-election campaign, now they face expulsion from their universities. When you are, when the federal constitution in as a whole is supposed to encourage one's freedom of speech and expression. Yeah. So that's basically it, in short.
So legally we are not wrong, but does this bring any impact to the law? Like the parliament can still choose to not abolish that.
No. Because of that. Okay. Decisions, right? That 15.5a, which bars students from from participating in political campaign, is now no longer valid. So students now can be involved, can participate in political, in political activities, lah. Yeah. Okay,
and that shows just how important it is to know what rights you have in the federal constitution.
Yes, correct.
But for those who don't know the full extent of this, what kind of cases is this also applied in?
You mean the
extent of the constitution? Like what does it cover, maybe?
Okay. Fundamental liberties is only one part of it, actually. Mm-hmm. There are so many. There are so many aspects that we need to know. Okay, just because fundamental liberties, of course, is the one aspect that we all can relate to. Not just freedom of speech and expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, of education, religion, property. Yeah, but also the federal constitution sets out the limits of government. Yeah, sets out the limits of government, and it doesn't only talk about the parliament. Parliament. It also talks about executive. It also talks about the judiciary, and then we all know in Malaysian judiciary we practice dual system in which the civil law and Sharia law are both in place. So that's one. And then besides that, also there are also other creatures created by the constitution. When I say these creatures are created by the constitution, the impact is that their powers are limited by the constitutions. For example, the YDPA, actually our monarch, our highest monarch is also a creature of the constitution. Meaning to say, even the YDPA, their powers are limited by the constitution. We have the Election Commission, and then we have the National Land Council. We have we have a few of these other bodies. They are all created by the constitution, and therefore they can only act within the powers that were set out in the federal constitution. Yeah.
So, I see that the constitution has 16 parts, yeah?
Yes.
Yes. Part 1 being on states, religion, and the law of the federation. Part 2 is the fundamental liberties that we talk about.
Yes.
Part 3 is what makes you Malaysian, like citizenship. Part 4, the federation. Part 5, the states.
Yes.
Talking about the states that constitutes Malaysia, and maybe not just states. And then Part 6 is relation between the federation and the states. Part 7, financial provisions. Part 8, elections.
Yes.
And I'm sure the election commission is also a creature that is created.
Yes, correct.
And then after that is the judiciary. Then 10 is the public services, which includes the police force, the armed force, the education service. And then part 11 is special powers against subversion, organized violence, and acts and crimes as prejudicial to the public and emergency powers. This sounds like a very potentially expensive powers. And then after that is general and miscellaneous.
Yes.
And then there's a part on additional protections for states of Sabah and Sarawak. Well, I don't know if they are correctly constituted as states, but yeah, that's an argument for another time. But and then after that, it's another part on temporary and transitional provisions, and then saving for rulers' sovereignty part. And proceedings against the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the monarch and the rulers.
Okay, yeah,
So,
these are all, as you have correctly pointed out, these are all 16 parts in the Federal Constitution. So what we did under the campaign is that we've actually identified at least 9 main parts of the Federal Constitution, which we think are important to be brought out to the public's attention. Yeah, which is why we then come up with this 9 series of Rakyat Guides focusing on different aspects of the Federal Constitution. So like I said, like fundamental liberties, obviously that's one thing that everyone can relate to. So that's a topic on its own. So it's fundamental liberties comes together with citizenship. And also we have federal-state relations. You mentioned federal-state relations being the, being one of the parts. So when it comes to federal-state relations, this is also important in the sense that it tells you our system of governments. And to be specific, we in Malaysia, we practice a federal system where there is a federal government in place, a federal government, Wilayah Persekutuan, and also their states, their state governments. Yeah, and they are allocation, or rather, they are division of powers between the federal government and the state government. So if you look in the Federal Constitution, it also sets up what is it that the federal government can do, what is it that the state government can do. This would be different from a system, a unitary system. Unitary system is where the central government has all the powers, and then the provinces has very limited powers when it comes to the administration of governance.
Right.
Yes.
But is it also contrasted with the republic model?
The other model is what you call a confederation system. Yeah, confederation system.
Right. The
Confederation system is the reverse. Confederation system is where the state government is doing most of the administrative governance, and then the federal government only retains minimal power. Yeah, so that's a confederative states, a confederative system of governance. Yeah, so in Malaysia, of course, the argument, or rather, I wouldn't say controversies, but the argument is that people are saying the federal government is taking more and more power from the state government, to the point that the state government is left without a proper capacity and resources to run its state.
And we see this very well reflected in the water crisis here.
Yes. And then we also see it in the Kelantan government, or Penang, and Selangor. All these, I think we don't see it as clear as before, because maybe back then the opposition isn't as strong as now, isn't as strong as present. So now the opposition has somehow becoming a strong bloc, to the extent that it holds power in certain states. So because of that, you can actually see the power play even clearer. So let's just say all this division of power is made more complicated when, of course, politics come into play. Like for example, the allocation of federal resources. Yeah, the situation is that those whose MPs are not from the ruling government, from the winning party, are not given allocation to run their constituency. So that's one important issue, and then the states, which is run not by the ruling government, were not given as much allocation, were not given as much resources to run the state as compared to other states which were run by the same party as the federal government. So, I mean, that's that's what happened when politics come into play. But what I'm saying is that if you ask me whether or not federal system is a good system, is a good concept, I say it's a good concept, but there must be clear demarcation of powers between federal government and state government. And a federal government cannot be allowed to take so much powers as to render the state government hopeless in its running of, or rather in its governance of that particular state. Because at the end of the day, of course, you have to look at the people you are serving, isn't it? So, I mean, that's the situation with federal and state relations. And of course, we can explore this more in the third series of the slot, which I hope will be taking off.
Yes, do stay tuned, because we'll be definitely explaining this concept a little more, because we understand that perhaps for the non-lawyers it might be a different, an entirely different subject to start learning.
Well, the federal constitution, let's just say it's a living document. No, when I say it's a living document, it's not rigid, and it is actually drafted as such as to provide flexibility due to the changing times. Yeah, but it cannot be so flexible that it allows for so many, all this power play to come into place and then ruin the basic spirit of the federal constitution. That's the concern when the other day I talk about 600 over amendments, right? So that's the main concern. So one of the other reasons why we do this campaign is to tell people, look, this is what is in the federal constitution, so that there will not be a day when later we realize that the federal constitution is no longer what it's supposed to be. Yeah,
because I should also say that to forewarn everyone about the danger of having more than 2/3 majority in the parliament is that the government can choose to amend constitution as much as it likes to, because it takes 2/3 to amend the constitution.
Yes.
And I've seen some reports talking about how in 53 years, or more than that, of independence, it has been amended even 700 times. I don't know what's the exact figure.
I think including the minor amendments, then you may be right that it may has reached 700 actually.
And with a comparison with the United States Constitution, like how many years it was, and
I can't remember, but obviously it is a very big gap between how many amendments that they made and how many amendments that we made. Even if we exclude all the minor amendments, I think we are the country in the world with the most amendments to their own constitution, and that's not a good thing.
Yes, I believe that a lot of people say that Malaysia does earn the top spot in the number of amendments that we have made to our constitution. I think that the importance or the impact of this is that now government can justify any actions that they want to. Like, for all you care, like, okay, just to give the scenario, more dramatic scenario, if they do have 2/3 majority, for all you care, they could institute very, let's say, I don't know, but I'm just, correct me if I'm wrong. They can institute massacre or whatnot, in the constitution and say, oh, it's legally, allowed in the constitution. Can they do that? And as long as it happens in Malaysia, okay, we can kill anyone. Is that theoretically possible?
Well, that's a bit of a very violent example. I can't exactly quite picture how it happened, how it could happen. But let's just say, using that as a parallel example, if the ruling government is given the 2/3 majorities, they can actually amend the constitutions, and this covers almost everything. Of course, there are certain aspects in the federal constitution which require, for example, if it concerns the Sabah and Sarawak, it would require the Yang di-Pertua Negeri of the Sabah and Sarawak. It would require their consent. And if it concerns of certain issues concerning the rulers, it would require the consent from the Conference of Rulers. Yes, I mean, except for those certain things, the other things would allow the Federal Constitution to be amended by 2/3 majority.
Right.
And it is dangerous. And I mean, although I wouldn't give that kind of example, but it is
what
dangerous.
about my Malaysia would example? Is it theoretically possible?
No, I don't think so lah. I can't imagine how you wanna, because at the end of the day, there are still other laws in place.
Right.
And then you in the Federal Constitution, it gives you the right to life. Yeah.
Okay.
So
but I could erase that if I have 2/3, right?
well, some say this is the argument. You can only do so much amendments, but it cannot go against the basic features of the Constitution. This is actually a doctrine of I think it's called doctrine of basic structure of the Constitution. So what are the basic structure of the Constitution? It's actually not set up it's not set out in stone what are the basic features of the Constitution. But I guess, we can see that, for example, what sets out the system of governance. Yeah, what sets out the system of governance, and the fact that, for example, we practice federal system, and the fact that we have at least three main organs of the government. We have legislature, we have the executive, we have the judiciary. Those are the basic structure, and then the fact that we have certain fundamental rights given to the citizens. That to me is a basic structure of the Constitution, and for you to simply take that away.
I mean, it will cause a public outcry,
obviously,
I'm sure, but
and it violates the basic structure of the Constitution.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. But the structure can be amended, can it?
Well, the argument is that it should not be amended.
Right.
Yeah, it should not be amended. So, I don't think it will happen. But what I'm saying is that, in the Parliament, if they want to do that, the members of Parliament has to make sure that whatever amendments they need to make, it cannot go against this basic structure. Yeah, even if it will happen, then like you say lah, there'll be uproar, there'll be chaos. Yeah, and at the end of the day, the Federal Constitution will be seen as a useless document, and that is what we are trying to avoid now. Yeah.
Right, instituting rule of law. Although we have had many constitutional crises in Malaysia, though.
Yes, we do. Well, the way I see it, it's unavoidable. Of course, you tell me in many other countries where they don't exactly have constitutional crisis, in countries which has constitutions, and the important thing is to go back to the Federal Constitution. As I've said before, the Federal Constitution is in its drafting. It's not drafted in such a rigid manner that it cannot at all be amended, or cannot at all be interpreted in any other way. Simply because you have to look at it in the changing times. You know what I mean? Yeah. But all right. Basically, what I'm saying is that the Federal Constitution, you can amend it. Yeah. You can amend it, but the amendment has to be because of the changing times. You understand what I'm trying to say or not? Okay. So that's fine. The amendment has to be because of the changing times. It cannot be because of some political party want to retain their power. Although we see that happen, and that is why it gives rise to this constitutional crisis.
We were talking about constitutional crisis.
Yes. And then when there is constitutional crisis, that is why we have the judiciary to decide.
But what happens in, was it 1988, where Mahathir allegedly sacked the highest judges in the land as well? So isn't that a crisis?
Yes, that is that is obviously definitely a constitutional crisis, and I can tell you the 1988. I can't exactly remember the details, but I can tell you the 1988 constitutional crisis, judicial crisis. Yep. It actually has its mark even until now. That is the extent of the impact of what we see. Because if you actually look at the wordings of the Federal Constitution, it also embodies this principle of this concept of separation of power, where the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, they all has separate and independent functions, and they were to operate separately. Why? Because of this other concept called check and balance. For example, if there is some executive actions, executive decisions taken by the government which contradicts the federal constitution, this can be brought up to the to the judiciary, and then the judiciary can decide whether or not that particular action or decision is against the federal constitution. Same as what we've discussed much earlier about a law. If the parliament enacts a law and then the law tramples on citizens' right, for example, so that particular citizens, can bring it up to court, and then the court can decide that this particular law is unconstitutional, or the court can say this particular law should be interpreted in such a way that it should not trample the citizens' right. So what happened in 1998 actually culminated from let's just say the frustration between the organs of the government, because one is seen as trying to encroach on the other functions of, so for example, for the particularly when if the judiciary were to operate independently without fear or favor, were to decide on any decisions, on any cases without fear or favor, they need to be able to do that free from any influence, or pressure from the government. So I believe it culminated from that frustration when the doctrine of separation of power was not adhered or honored in the governance system.
And I think maybe in the context of Mahathir times, where perhaps the executive is seen to be trying to even overpower the judiciary.
Yes. Yeah, so
that's why.
You mentioned rule of law earlier, right? Mm-hmm. So in essence, the federal constitution, when we want to embrace it, of course, the rule of law must be seen to be upheld. In the rule of law is where you see, under the concept of the rule of law is where you see this concept of independent judiciary. Independent judiciary is a very important concept in a democratic society. And then you also have, the concept of separation of powers, and all of this are all of these are what you should see in a good system of governance. Whereas during that times, what happened is that you're right. The executive is seen trying to exert more and more power into all these other branches of government. And of course, they're also seen at that point of time, where they seem to have no concern about the citizens' rights. So there are also arguments on that. So this created, more frustration. So let's just say, looking back, at history, this will be what happened when we place low respect on the spirit of the federal constitution. Yeah.
All right, we'll have a short break now, and after this session, we'll have a FAQ and some case examples. Back to ASEAN Breakfast Call. Now let's move on to how does the Constitution affect us really?
Okay, this is one important thing that, we always try to tell people, look, you have to know about the federal constitution because the constitution affects you at the end of the day, and it's not just fundamental liberties, but there are also other things. Okay, for example, when we talk about fundamental liberties, people usually look at Part 2 of the Federal Constitution. If I'm not mistaken, it's from Article 5 until 13. But there's also Article 119 of the Federal Constitution, which some would say gives you the right to vote. So, for example, if you look in that article, Article 119 says that you can vote if, first, you are a citizen of Malaysia, second, you have attained 21 years of age, and third, you have registered. of course, the situation in Malaysia is that you have so many who are citizens of Malaysia who have reached 21 years of age but have not registered. So that's another issue. But what we are trying to say here is that if you are aware of your rights under the Constitution, if you are aware of the significance of you understanding the Federal Constitution, then you should have registered in the electoral roll, because at the end of the day, the way I see it, how the Federal Constitution will turn out, even in its implementation, you as the as the one who has the voting power will decide. So anyway, how the Constitution affect us? First, of course, it gives you that right to vote under Article 119. So that's one. And then also citizenships. Yeah. For example, if you are not Malaysian and your husband are Malaysian, then you can actually make application to for citizenship, for Malaysian citizenship. And then if you and your husband are Malaysian citizens and then you give birth, no matter where you give birth, even if it's outside Malaysia, then that son or daughter of yours are automatically Malaysian under Article 14 of the Federal Constitution. Yeah, so that's important to know. And also, if you actually look in the Federal Constitution under citizenship, right, you are not actually allowed to have dual citizenship. Some actually, you can also be an American and at the same time a Canadian, for example, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, you can have dual citizenship, but in Malaysia, you're not allowed to have dual citizenship. And then if, for example, you go to another country and then you exercise a right exclusive to the citizens of that other country, you can lose your citizenship as well. In the sense that, for example, if you go to that other country and then you vote in their country, because that right to vote in that country is only exclusive to that country, isn't it? And then you went on and voted at that country's particular general elections. By you doing that, you can also lose your citizenship as a Malaysian. So anyway, so that's one other important things that you need to know about the Constitution, because it will affect you at the end of the day. And then also, for example, you're a football fan, and then during the FA Cup, Selangor won, for example. Selangor won, and then of course the Selangor state is very happy, and then they pronounce it as a state holiday. Yeah, so the Selangor government can pronounce a state holiday, but of course if you are from some other state or if you are working at the state, you cannot because it's only that state. But what I'm saying here is that the power of state government to declare its own state holidays is provided for in the Federal Constitution. Yeah, so that's one. And then of course you also have the right to property. The right to property, it says, basically Article 13 states that no person shall be deprived of property save in accordance with the law. And the law says, if the law when it comes to property, among others, it sets up in the National Land Code when it comes to lands. So the government cannot just arbitrarily take your land away and that's it, and then you're left with no land and nowhere to live.
I think I'm having that problem. Literally, my parents are having that problem.
Oh my, okay. They cannot do that actually, because under the law, they have to give proper and reasonable notification to you as landowner. That's one. And also they have to provide reasonable compensation. Of course, the word reasonable is vague, and then people argue that usually the compensation isn't as reasonable as it should be. It's actually much lower than the value of the land, for example. So, but that's what the provisions, or rather that's what the law says, and the right to property basically doesn't give the government a power to simply take people's property away. So that's one. So and then also taxes. All these taxes, basically government expenditure and spending. Before they can spend federal money, they have to present the budget in Parliament, and it's only when the budget is passed that, or rather approved and passed, that the budget can be worked on. So that's one. And then also, of course, this one is very important. If you are arrested, you must be, you have the right to have access to a lawyer, and that's what Article 5(3) of the Constitution says. Sometimes you're so scared, and then you don't know anyone, and you just what you call that? You just say yes to whatever that the police wants you to say. You can actually demand for the right to have a lawyer, and that's what Article 5(3) says. And Article 5 talks about your right to life and liberty. Now, talking about right to life, that's also very interesting. Right to life doesn't just indicate your right to animal existence, right to breathe. It actually goes beyond that. For example, there are case laws which says that right to life also covers right to have a meaningful life, meaning to say right to an employment, for example.
Livelihood.
Yes, right to livelihood, correct. And then right to clean air. All these are way more than just animal existence. So to me, if you ask me, right to life and liberty should be looked at or should be interpreted in such a manner. Also, if you notice, I won't say that the Federal Constitution is a perfect document. Yeah. And I say because of that, all the more reason we all should know about what the Federal Constitution is about. I give you one example of why I don't think it's a perfect document. It has freedom of speech and expression, but it does not have freedom of information, freedom to actually have access to information. One issue, this was way back, many years back. That time, there was a haze problem. Of course, there was a haze problem now also, but back then, the haze problem was very bad. And there was one time that the government refuses to disclose the air pollution index. But I'm not sure whether, I think the concern was because they were worried about foreign investors and whatnot. But my point is that the government's refusal to disclose air pollution index violates your freedom of information, isn't it? Because you as a citizens have the right to have that information which affects you at the end of the day. But the thing is, if you look at the wording of the Federal Constitution, it's not there. Although some argue that you can actually read it under the freedom of speech and expression, but wouldn't it be better if you have explicitly,
I think this might also explain why there's a big movement
yes,
in
correct.
the Western world to have freedom of information.
Yes, and I think if you actually see some states in Malaysia is actually pushing towards having
FOIA.
Yes, correct. The
Freedom of Information Act.
So that's a good move, and I hope eventually it will lead to the inclusion of that freedom of information in the Federal Constitution itself. So yeah, I think that's more or less how the Constitution would affect. There's so many actually. Like for example, the limitation of powers of government, even though it concerns the government, and for example, you cannot be bothered about joining political parties, for example. But at the end of the day, you as citizens, when you read news every day, or when you hear about whatever news that talks about, okay, this politician says this politician says that, at the end of the day, where, as usual, where politics come into play, different people will say different things, and different people will come up with a different interpretation of what they think the law is. And of course, that interpretation would only suit their own interests.
Yep.
And then you'll be left in the middle, wondering what exactly is the best interpretation, which one exactly is the correct, law, is the correct application of the law. So for you to be able to do that, for you to be able to differentiate, and then decide for yourself which interpretation is good, you first and foremost have to know what exactly that the law says. Yeah, so hence that's another important reason why we need to know about the Federal Constitution.
So maybe we'll ask about some frequently asked questions from the floor about the Constitution, do I have to obey it? Is there people who doesn't have to obey the Constitution?
Well, no. But of course, the confusion arises when, as I've said, when those in power comes into play. Like, I'm not trying to picture them as though they're all bad people. But what I'm saying is that, for example, the executive, they are, at the end of the day, creatures of the Constitution. So, because of that, yes, they have to obey the Constitution. The Prime Minister, the Cabinet, members of Parliament, everyone, they have to obey the Constitution. Even the Agong has to obey the Constitution. We are not exactly practicing absolute monarchy in the country. Because of the Federal Constitution, we have what we call a constitutional monarchy, where their powers are restricted or limited by the Federal Constitution. If you look in the Federal Constitution, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong only has 2 discretionary power. First, to dissolve the Parliament, and also to appoint the Prime Minister. The rest, they have to do on the advice of the Prime Minister. Which means at the end of the day, they have to follow the advice anyway. So, that's that. And basically what I'm trying to say is Parliament, members of Parliament, judges, even Yang di-Pertuan Agong has to follow. And of course, you yourself as a citizen also has to follow the Federal Constitution. Yes.
But like we mentioned before, it seems like the Parliament can amend the Constitution. And how can we ensure, as normal citizens, that the power is not abused?
Okay. The way I see it, earlier on I mentioned about the balancing of powers through check and balance by the different organs of government. The thing is, we shouldn't look at this, check and balance, checking and balancing as to only come from this government. Even the citizens also has a role to play. So when you say, like, for example, if there's a particular amendment which the citizens are very concerned about and they don't want it to be passed. So what you usually in the usual convention is that, if judging from the trend or judging from the public atmosphere, people are not exactly fond of that particular amendment. Most likely the government will not pass. You will see, you will see this particular proposed amendment, being announced in the media, and then people will then comment about it. So, if it's not popular with the people, then usually the government will not pass such law. But of course,
in an
the
ideal
reverse has happened.
democracy.
But you know what? I don't think we should lose hope.
Right.
For example, during the passing of the Peaceful Assembly Act, a lot of people were very concerned about it, and the Bar Council has actually organised a walk to the Parliament to actually give an alternative.
Walk for the freedom to walk.
Yeah, to give an alternative to that, to that proposed act. Of course, at the end of the day, the alternative bill was not considered by the Parliament, and Parliament actually passed that law. But my point is that is one example what we as the citizens can do when we feel that a certain proposed amendment is not is not going to benefit the citizens at the end of the day. And of course, even if it gets passed, all hopes are not lost, because we can still take up to court, and the judiciary will then play its role to decide on the constitutionality of that particular law. Yeah. So at the moment, I know of one case that is being brought up under the Peaceful Assembly Act, and parties are actually arguing or rather submitting on the constitutionality of that particular provisions under the Peaceful Assembly Act. Of course, it's not yet reaches to the conclusion of the trial. It's still going on for trial. So we will see how it goes.
All right. Thank you very much, Firdaus, for sharing with us about the Constitution. We'll definitely be having more of a series of what the Constitution really entails.
Yes.
So stay tuned. And my message to all listeners would be know your rights and exercise them. So,
Yes. All right.
thank you. See you in our next show.